Yes, welcome back. We're still watching Daybreak right here on Citizen TV as we continue to look at the issues behind the headlines this morning with Dismas Mukwa, political analyst, and Anthony Oluoch, MP Mathare constituency. We will now want to look at the big headline on the front page of the Standard, how you will raise 118 billion shillings for Uhuru project. And this one we'll look at it because it will affect quite a number of people. Special tax for salaried. This is a plan. There'll be a special tax for salaried Kenyans to raise billions required to push the president's legacy program aimed at increasing cheap housing in urban areas. Remember, affordable housing is one of the big four agenda for President Uhuru Kenyatta. Now, workers will raise 118 billion shillings to fund President Uhuru Kenyatta's affordable housing. A worker earning a salary of 100,000, for instance, will pay 500 shillings a month, and the amount will be matched by the employer, so in total you'll pay about 1,000 shillings. Now, among the biggest concerns about the levy, however, is the qualifying criteria for the home buyers, given that the biggest contributors are not the targeted beneficiaries, because only people earning 99,999, that's a shilling less than 100,000, will qualify for the government scheme. Houses will range from 600,000 shillings. And this is for ownership for a student apartment, and up to 3 million shillings for a 3-bedroom apartment. It sounds like a reasonable plan, but it appears to be very punitive to a section of Kenyans. When Anthony will watch, if at all people who earn 100,000 shillings and above will have to pay for this monthly, about 1,000 shillings. Even employers are already complaining because they have to fork out an equal amount of money. If at all you pay 500, the employer has to match that. Don't you think that maybe the plan would have widened the net for people to benefit from this plan? Or what generally do you think about this plan?
First, I think there is general consensus that the Big Four are a good idea. They've been embraced in Parliament. I think the public embraced them. But I think I saw a bill or a proposed bill by Moses Kuria, and I think reading into it, he seems to have been suggesting, which I agree, that not much thought had been given beyond the idea itself in terms of its conception, how we are going to roll it out, who's going to foot the bill. Because if you're going to implement this and raise money from a certain category of people, the question you must ask is it a tax that you're levying? And if it is a tax that you're levying, or a deduction that you're making on a certain category of people, that cannot be done other than through a process that goes to Parliament. Nothing that has the force of law that has an implication of either a deduction or a levy of tax on the people can be effected unless it goes to Parliament. And looking at the way our Appropriation Act was done, monies were just lumped, saying we will take this into manufacturing, this into development, this into this program. But I think there is not much thought that was put into it. And if you ask me, I think there was need for a stakeholder involvement, sectorial. Let's take, for example, housing. Mukwa has been talking off here on some ideas comparatively on how the question of housing has been achieved. Which way should we go? I'm sure he'll probably raise that. Is it to build houses for people and make somebody pay for it, or to lease, or to provide the enabling infrastructure? So I think there is need to have a national conversation around this. And if you're talking in terms of, for example, if you leave out the housing thing, the question about how 1.3 million jobs, how do we achieve this? And that's why I was a bit upset myself with Rashid. It is his docket, for example, on the youths. We should be talking what portion of number of jobs we should be having a conference, a conversation around each of these thematic areas. And if possible, we probably need to have a supplementary appropriation somewhere down in October to try and plug in this. Okay.
The legality of this deduction, if at all that obstacle is done away with, and they eventually get to deduct this from employees. We've seen quite a number of statutory deductions on employees, including NSSF, NHIF, which at some point or the other have always encountered problems with how that money is handled in terms of pilferage. You've seen even investments by NSSF. People have really done quite a lot in terms of creating loopholes to get that money out. NHIF is still working to seal loopholes. any such project with regard, talking about any such amounts, 1,000 shillings per employee or any such amount, will be big money. We're talking about big money. If at all the idea is not really well thought out, don't you think that this is just another route for Kenyans to lose money?
Well, first of all, we have that monetary and fiscal crisis leadership, and they want to impose another tax. So that is going to be heavy. Actually, when you're looking at the cost of a housing, depending on whom you speak with, taxation is about 40%. So you don't want again to increase another component so that maybe it jumps to 41 or 42%. And in my view, taxation is not going to sort the housing crisis we have in Kenya. Kenya is suffering from housing insecurity because as a nation we have not taken a decision. There are some countries like South Korea or Singapore that took a decision long time ago that they're going to work on 100% home ownership. So what the governments in those countries have done is to create opportunities to realize their achievements. And the first thing we need to be asking ourselves as Kenyans, do we provide serviced properties or serviced land? That if I buy a piece of land somewhere and I want to put up a house, it shouldn't be on the property developer to put up a road, to get the water, to get electricity, to do all that infrastructure, because it raises the cost of housing. In these other economies, they said we are going to provide you with serviced land. So the only thing you need to do is to put up your house. So they've taken a decision.
The roads, sewage and water, everything is done.
Everything is done. So for you is to identify a piece of land, you go and put up a house. And then they've adopted new technologies. In Kenya, for some reason, you must put up a stone house. But in other parts of the world, I mean, like in the US or in the UK, you can put up a house made of timber or steel or glass, and it still works. Still in other parts of Kenya, you know, you can put up a brick house. But if you want to put up a brick house in Nairobi, it becomes a complication. Or again, we need to take the decision whether or not we're going to encourage people to pay rent so that we give very good incentives to property developers for them to come up with houses so that we are able to pay rent. And I think those are the philosophical questions we need to be asking ourselves. We need to be addressing the supply side. If you look at the upmarket housing in Kenya, if you want to buy a house maybe for 50 million today, you'll be spoiled for choice. You know, there are so many. And every property developer is coming up with that property, but it's vacant. If you drive around the Kileleshwa, the property is going for around 20 million. But how many people can afford that mortgage? If you go back to records, from independence, we've given out only less than 25,000 mortgages in a population of 45 million Kenyans. That tells you how our financial sector is responding to issues. And the Honorable Oluoch represents our constituency, and his voters would like to buy houses. But can they afford a mortgage of 20 million? They cannot. Maybe what the public sector is supposed to be doing is to come up with ingenious ways of actually coming up with a property in Nairobi which can go for 5 million.
You seem to be in agreement that this idea does not appear to be well thought out. Is that what you're saying?
Well, not in those words. If I was seated in that position, I would have gone backwards, and as the Honorable Oluoch has indicated, bring together stakeholders and ask ourselves, what do we want to do as a nation? Because the crisis we have in Kenya is for low-income housing. Anybody who wants, say, 200, 300,000 per month has no challenge getting a house. I mean, right now, if you drive around Nairobi, there are many properties. But for the fellas who are in the low-income category, somebody who wants a house for 5 million, you will not be looking for that one. And in my view, what we should be defining as we look at the Agenda 4, or rather the Big 4 agenda, is the definition of affordable housing, how does that mean, and make that one available. That is the crisis we are facing.
600,000 for studio apartment, do you think that's affordable housing? Does it fall in the category of affordable housing?
Yes, I mean, if you're able to build that, you would still be able to be asking yourself, what is affordable? Because if you're talking Madare,
yes, exactly,
and you're talking Kibra, those people live on less than what, 100 shillings, 200 shillings a day? They barely have enough to even eat or feed. So the question of affordable would have to be, and you may have to do some affirmative action things. I mean, if you go, for example, to Kibra or Madare, somebody who goes to Juakali and maybe averagely earns 500 shillings, you probably need to give them a house that costs 200,000, 300,000, but allow them to pay over 20, 30 years.
Are we saying that this project intended to actually cure the issue of affordable housing, the lack of affordable housing may actually not do that? Because even 3 million shillings for a 3-bedroom house, probably not very many people can afford that.
But at least you will be taking care of a good part of the population. And if you create a housing surplus in Kenya, then without doubt the basics of economics come in. That the cost will.
So 3,600,000 shillings for a studio apartment, you feel that is affordable?
Well, there's a category of Kenyans who will be very happy with that. That would be a first step. But the key question is, how come we don't have sufficient properties in Kenya? It's because, in my view, majority of the people in the financial sector services are lazy. They don't want to go the extra mile and come up with the innovative products. How do you expect somebody who earns, say, 30,000 a month to get a mortgage? Do you know that if right now, if you go to any bank and you're looking for a mortgage, it's so complicated. Others would insist that you must have a very good bachelor's degree. If you have a degree which they don't consider to be very solid, they would say you need to have a master's. If it's not a master's which is not solid, they would expect you to have a PhD. At some stage, banks in Kenya were not giving people without a bachelor's degree a mortgage. So if Bill Gates comes to Kenya, he doesn't qualify for a mortgage. Or if Richard Branson comes to Kenya, he doesn't qualify for a mortgage. Instead of the bankers looking at the ability of somebody to repay, they're looking at academic qualifications. If you've got a bachelor's of degree in medicine, they roll out a red carpet for you. But if
would
you've
it
got
be
a
better if the president would have actually worked with banks and these other financing institutions to actually probably work with them in terms of doing this instead of taxing, introducing more taxes, like this headline reads?
For me, I think what the president ought to have done, and maybe Honorable Oluoch can bring this in the National Assembly, is just to release land. Release a lot of land available for housing. Make sure that there is power everywhere. Make sure there are roads everywhere, water, electricity, so that at least you work on that issue. Because you see, the private sector, the bankers, they don't care about what President Kenyatta is thinking of.
But do you think that incentives to these to the private sector players would work better? That if at all the government partnered with them, it would be much easier than simply applying a tax to people who are already overtaxed? No.
Most of the time, the private sector, they do not have a long-term view on anything. You are the managing director of a bank today. You've been given targets you're supposed to be meeting at the end of every financial period. So that's what you're going to be working on. But the president has got the chance to look at, give us a long-term view. And, just, it should suffocate the Kenyan property space with serviced land. That if I want to put up a property in Mosoche, in Kisii, I don't have a problem with the road, with electricity, with water, with anything. And of course, in the process, offer security.
But if the president was to use this route in all the big four plans that he has, more taxation, now for housing, an extra 500. We go to health, he introduces more taxation. We go to manufacturing, more taxation. Surely, do you think that's the way to go?
That's why I think the partnership approach and bringing people to the table would have worked for me. I want to summarize it this way, that no country ever taxed itself to prosperity. If your solution to this is the agenda I want to achieve, tax, another agenda tax, another agenda tax, I think we need to sit down and interrogate how you're going to achieve the big four. But taxation, it's not going to work.
Okay. Yeah. Well, that's a big headline on the front page of the Standard this morning. How you will raise 118 billion shillings for Uhuru project. It is a very big discussion. And it will definitely affect you because the tax will come straight from your pockets. One more headline before we wrap up and before we go to that big interview with the NEMA Director General, Wahiga Mora will be conducting that. It's in a headline, and I had mentioned it earlier with regard to an ODM member.
It's in the Nation.
It's on the Daily Nation, yes. Page 6 of the Daily Nation. ODM accused